Welcome to the Before AGI podcast. Today we're going to be diving into this question that's been kind of floating around, should robots have rights?
Yeah, it's really interesting how it's gone from like science fiction to a real ethical debate. And we're seeing people getting anxious about AI, like will it take our jobs? Will it get too smart and like overpower us?
I mean, it's straight out of Terminator, right? But it's like a real concern people have about AI.
For sure. Yeah.
So today we're going to unpack those anxieties, right? Like look at the arguments for and against giving robots rights. What it all means for us, at work, in our lives, all that stuff.
Yeah, and Avasant, they're a global like research and advisory firm. They make a really interesting point. They talk about robots that appear to think on their own, which sounds pretty freaky, right?
It does. So how do we get from lines of code to robots that seem like they're thinking?
Well, it's all about data. Tons of data. Like we feed algorithms massive amounts of data, and that gives them the ability to learn and adapt. They start to see patterns, make predictions, and even come up with like new solutions that we didn't program them to find.
So it's not just following a script anymore. They're like learning and evolving based on the information we give them.
Exactly. It's like, when you give a kid a set of Legos, they might start by following the instructions, but eventually they'll start experimenting, building their own stuff based on what they've learned. It's kind of like that with AI.
Wow. So that raises a big question, right? If they're thinking for themselves, could they like develop a sense of self, even desires and a moral compass, like humans?
That's the heart of the argument for robot rights. If we make machines that can learn, adapt, and even solve problems, maybe even better than humans, then shouldn't we start thinking of them as more than just machines?
But isn't there a test for that? Like, if a machine can convince us it's human?
Ah, you're thinking of the Turing test, developed by Alan Turing. Basically, it's a way to see if a machine can hold a conversation so well that a human can't tell they're talking to a computer.
So if a robot passes that test, acts like us, maybe even thinks like us, does that mean it deserves the same rights?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's sparking a lot of debate. Some argue that if a machine reaches that level of intelligence and awareness, then yeah, it deserves the same moral consideration.
I can already hear the other side of the argument firing up. Like, are we really going to give robots the same rights as humans? Isn't that like opening a can of worms?
Well, Avasant brings up those concerns too. There's a lot of anxiety that giving robots rights could lead to, some pretty scary scenarios, like humans becoming servants to our own creations.
It's like that classic sci-fi trope, right? The robots taking over. But is that realistic, or is it just Hollywood fear-mongering?
It's tough to predict the future, especially with something as complex as AI, but it's a question worth asking. Like, if we blur the lines between humans and machines, where does that leave us?
And Avasant also pointed out that expanding robot rights could really impact human safety. Think about robots used in dangerous situations like bomb disposal or exploring hazardous environments.
Yeah, if a robot has the same rights as a human, is it ethical to send it into a situation where it could be harmed or destroyed?
It's tricky because we already have these ethical dilemmas with animals, like police dogs or search and rescue animals. But extending those considerations to machines, that's a whole new level.
It really makes us rethink our whole framework of moral obligations, like who or what deserves our protection. It's a conversation that's not going away anytime soon.
And speaking of robots and rules, didn't Asimov, the science fiction writer, come up with some laws for robots?
He did. Asimov's 3 laws of robotics are pretty famous. They basically state robots can't harm humans, they have to obey human orders unless it violates the first law, and they have to protect themselves. But not if it goes against the first 2 laws.
They sound straightforward enough.
Yeah, but in reality, could we actually program those laws into robots? That's been a debate for decades. Like, on paper, they make sense, but turning them into code that governs a robot's actions in every possible situation, that's incredibly difficult, especially with AI constantly learning and adapting.
So even with these clear laws, there are still huge challenges in making sure robots act ethically as they become more autonomous.
Absolutely. The more complex AI gets, the more complex our ethical dilemmas become. There are no easy answers here.
So if Asimov's laws aren't the perfect solution, how else can we approach this whole robot rights thing? Are there other ways to think about our relationship with these increasingly intelligent machines?
Well, Professor Kim, who studied ethics and technology for years, offers an interesting alternative. He comes at it from a Confucian perspective.
Confucian? That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
So Professor Kim argues that instead of focusing on individual rights, which can create, an adversarial kind of dynamic, we should think about robot rights instead.
Rights, like rituals.
Not rituals exactly, but more like specific duties and responsibilities that are meant to promote harmony and collaboration within a community.
So instead of demanding rights, the robot would be fulfilling its role in a system built for, like, peaceful coexistence.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different way of framing the relationship between us and robots. It's more about a collective worldview, interconnectedness, shared responsibility.
That's a really interesting idea. So we've got these different perspectives on robot rights. Some arguing for full moral consideration, others worried about control and safety, and now this idea of robot rights instead of rights.
It's a complex landscape for sure. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but that's why these conversations are so important. We need to explore different viewpoints, weigh the risks and benefits, and decide what kind of future we want to build with AI.
So how does all this philosophical stuff actually play out in the real world? What does it mean for us, in our everyday lives?
Well, Avasant pointed out some trends that are already happening.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, for one, tools like ChatGPT are making more and more companies use AI. So we're likely to see more robots and AI working alongside humans.
So not just robots in factories and labs anymore.
Nope. We're talking offices, customer service, even creative fields. Avasant also mentioned AI adoption trends and customer experience, which suggests that AI is changing how we interact with businesses and services, too.
So it's affecting our lives as consumers, too, not just the workplace.
Exactly. We already see AI chatbots handling customer service, personalized recommendations powered by AI, even whole marketing campaigns driven by AI.
Wow, it's like AI is getting into every part of our lives. Where does that leave us? What should we be thinking about in this, new world of intelligent machines?
Professor Kim brings up a really interesting point. He says that how we treat robots might actually reflect on our own humanity.
I like that. It's not just about what robots deserve, but what kind of people we want to be.
If we mistreat machines made in our image, are we degrading ourselves? That's a deep question. And it reminds us that this isn't just a technical debate. It's about our values, our ethics, and what kind of future we want to create.
Yeah, lots to think about there. We'll need to take a break and come back to this in a bit.
Definitely. We've covered a lot, but there's still so much more to explore in this world of AI and robot rights. Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's true. We often think about AI as control and threats, but maybe it can also show us our own values,
It's like AI is making us ask these deep questions about being human, being responsible, and the world we're making.
And it's not just theory anymore. Like the European Parliament, they actually proposed this idea of electronic personhood for robots back in 2017.
So giving robots legal recognition with rights and responsibilities, that's a huge step.
It was. The idea was to, have a legal framework for AI and robotics because it's getting so complex. But you can imagine it faced a lot of pushback.
I bet. What were the arguments against it? Sounds like it would open a whole Pandora's box of problems. Oh, yeah. Critics said it was way too early, that we don't understand AI enough yet, and it could lead to all sorts of unintended consequences.
Like what specifically?
Well, one big thing was liability. If a robot hurts someone, who's to blame? The company, the programmer, the robot itself. It gets messy fast.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes me think about the debates around corporations having personhood. We give them rights, but they're made of people, ultimately. Robots are different.
Right. It's tempting to compare, but it's not that simple. Corporations have humans making decisions, stakeholders. Robots, even the really smart ones, they work on a different level.
Man, this is making my head spin. Every time I think we're getting close to an answer, more questions pop up.
That's the fun part. We're in uncharted territory here, and we have to keep challenging what we think and expand, our ethical ideas.
You mentioned earlier that defining autonomy for robots is tricky. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. One scholar, Bertolini, breaks it down into 3 types of autonomy. First, there's autonomy as consciousness, like the robot is self-aware, has free will.
So that's the classic sci-fi idea, like a human mind in a robot body.
Right. Then there's autonomy as being able to work on its own in an environment. This is more about what it can actually do. Can it navigate, make decisions based on data without us?
So a robot could be autonomous in that way without actually being self-aware.
Exactly. And the third type is autonomy as the ability to learn and adapt. This is what we talked about before, robots taking in new info, changing their behavior, even coming up with solutions we didn't give them.
So a robot can be autonomous in one way, but not another. It depends how we define it. Which brings us back to all those philosophy questions, right?
It's a circle, for sure, and it shows why we need so many different perspectives on this. Engineers, programmers, but also ethicists, philosophers, lawyers, even social scientists.
Because AI is going to impact everything, right?
Absolutely. It's not just the tech. It's how that tech changes our relationships, institutions, how we see what it means to be human, even.
We talked about robots becoming so advanced they're like us. But could interacting with AI change how we see ourselves?
Now that's an interesting thought. Will we see ourselves as more like machines? Or will it make us appreciate what's unique about human consciousness even more? It's like AI is a mirror to our own nature.
And some argue that focusing on robot rights might be missing the point. Maybe the real question is, how does our treatment of robots reflect on us?
It makes you think, right? We often see AI as about control, threats, but maybe it can also show us our own values and actions.
It's like AI is making us ask these deep questions about being human, being responsible, and the world we're making.
There was a study in Frontiers in Robotics and AI. They looked at this electronic personhood idea, and they found something interesting about how we tend to anthropomorphize, give human qualities to non-human things. It can be tricky.
So we might think robots are more capable than they are, or not see our own responsibility in how we treat them.
Yeah, it's like we need to find a balance, recognize what they can do, but not forget the differences between us and machines.
Right, because it could get confusing about who's accountable, what's a right for a person versus what's okay for a machine.
Exactly. The researchers said that while it's normal to compare us and robots, we have to be careful not to blur the lines too much. Giving them human-like qualities, even legally, could have unintended consequences.
Yeah, we need clear rules for interacting with AI, even if we don't go as far as electronic personhood.
For sure, because AI is already becoming a part of so many areas of our lives, even without that legal status. And those rules need to be flexible since the tech is always changing.
What was sci-fi yesterday is real today, right? We've got AI in healthcare, transportation, education, everywhere.
And that brings up all these questions about privacy, autonomy, what it means to work, have relationships, what happens when robots are caregivers, companions, even romantic partners. What are the ethics of that?
It's a whole new world, and we need to have some deep conversations about our values and how they'll shape how we deal with these intelligent machines. We've focused a lot on what we owe to robots. But what about the other way around? What do they owe us?
That's a really important point that often gets missed. If robots are going to be in our society, especially doing things on their own, interacting with us, we definitely need to think about their responsibilities.
It's like self-driving cars. If there's an accident, who's at fault? The person in the car, the company, the AI driving.
It's a tough question, legally and ethically. We need clear rules about who's responsible in the age of AI. And it's not just about laws, but moral responsibility, too.
Right. Even if we figure out the law, how do we deal with a machine being morally responsible? Can it understand consequences the way we do?
Philosophers have been debating this forever, but AI makes it even more urgent. And as robots get more advanced, these conversations are going to be more and more important.
We're just starting to explore this, it feels like. But one thing's clear. We can't avoid these tough questions as robots and AI become part of our lives.
Yeah, and these aren't just abstract debates. They affect how we design, build, and regulate AI.
The choices we make now will shape the future, a world where robots aren't just tools, but maybe partners, companions, even fellow citizens.
It's a future full of potential and challenges. And a big one is that there's no easy answer to whether robots deserve rights.
Because different cultures, beliefs, individuals, they all see this differently, right?
Exactly. That's where it gets interesting. Professor Kim, for example, he says that the Western idea of individual rights might not be the best way to think about robots. He thinks a Confucian view, which emphasizes harmony, interdependence, and roles, might be better.
So instead of robots demanding rights, they would be fulfilling duties in a system designed for everyone's well-being. That's a big shift.
It is. It shows we need to consider different cultural and philosophical ideas as we figure out ethical guidelines for AI. There's no single solution.
I keep thinking about that idea, how we treat robots shows our own moral progress. It's like a test. Can we be compassionate and respectful to something different from us, something we created?
I love that. If we can do that, it says a lot about our ability to empathize and what it really means to be human.
On that note, let's take a quick pause and come back for the final part of our robot rights deep dive.
So much more to discuss. Back in a flash.
Yeah, it's like this whole conversation is pushing us to think differently, not just rights or no rights.
That's what's so cool about AI. It makes us really think about what ethical even means. Like, How do we show moral consideration to something new? It even stretches how we empathize.
So where do we go from here? How do we make sure AI is actually good for humanity? What are the next steps?
Well, there are groups doing important work like the Partnership on AI with big companies like Google, Microsoft, Apple, all involved. They're trying to come up with ethical guidelines for developing and using AI.
So it's not just philosophers worried about this. Even the AI companies see the need for some rules, huh?
Yeah, it shows things are changing. People are realizing AI could be risky, and we need to get ahead of that. Another good thing is more research is being done on AI safety.
AI safety. Sounds like we're getting ready for a robot rebellion.
Not exactly. It's about making sure AI systems match up with human values, that they don't do something we didn't intend, and that we stay in control even as they get smarter.
Sounds like a big job. AI is moving so fast.
It's tough, but we have to do it. Too much is at stake.
We've talked a lot about the risks, but AI could be really good for us too, right? Like
Yeah.
changing healthcare, transportation, education, all that.
Absolutely. Tech is a tool. It can be used in good ways or bad. It depends on our choices.
Which brings us back to values. What future do we want with AI? What kind of world are we leaving for, the next generation?
Those are the questions we all need to think about. There aren't easy answers, but the more we talk about it, the better we'll be at handling this whole AI age. There was this study in Science Daily about how people see robot rights, and the results were kind of surprising.
Oh, what'd they find?
Turns out people were much more willing to say robots have responsibilities than to give them rights.
So maybe we're not ready to say robots are like us morally, but we still expect them to act right and be held accountable.
Seems that way. The researchers think it might be because we see robots as things we made, tools, so they should serve us and follow our morals.
Interesting how our view of robots is changing.
Mm.
But you said earlier that giving them legal personhood might just make our existing biases worse, right?
That's a real worry. We could accidentally program our own prejudices into AI if we're not careful.
Makes you think. It's not just the tech, but who makes it, who controls it, whose values are in it.
Exactly. We need to be critical, ask questions, demand transparency from the people shaping AI.
Because AI is too important to leave just to tech people and companies.
Mhm.
It's something we all need to be part of.
It's a conversation that's not going to end, especially as AI keeps changing. But one thing's for sure, what we decide now will affect the future for a long time.
It really will. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for this deep dive into robot rights.
We just scratched the surface. There's always more to learn.
If you want to know more, check out the sources we talked about today. And of course, subscribe to the Before AGI podcast for more discussions like this.
And don't forget Ian Okiang's YouTube channel, Ian Okiang AI, for tutorials and all sorts of AI insights.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the future of AI. Catch you next time.